Have you ever noticed that life seems to be cruelest to the kindest people? That the ones who show up, who care, who carry others somehow, paradoxically suffer the most? Maybe you've been there yourself. You tried to do everything right. You loved deeply, gave selflessly, told the truth, stayed humble, and life rewarded you not with peace, but with heartbreak, betrayal, loss, or failure. And in those moments, a deep question forms inside you, heavier than anger, deeper than sadness. Why? Why do bad things happen to good people? And what does it mean about the kind of world we actually live in? This question isn't just emotional, it's existential. It rattles the very framework we build our lives on. Because deep down, we all hold onto an unspoken assumption that life should be fair, and if we are good, life will be good to us. But this is where reality quietly, brutally breaks that illusion. And in that rupture, a strange kind of awakening can begin if you're brave enough not to look away. Because here's the thing, the universe is not a justice machine. It is not a God sitting on a throne, handing out rewards to the virtuous and punishment to the wicked like a celestial accountant. Nature doesn't care in the way we think of caring. It operates through a deeper principle, not of fairness, but of transformation. And this is where the truth begins to emerge. Bad things happen to good people not because they deserve pain, but because they are ready to carry it without turning it into more harm. Think about it. Who do you trust with grief, with loss, with suffering?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Not the callous, not the selfish, but the ones who have a deep heart, the ones who can hold pain without letting it rot into resentment. Good people suffer not as punishment, but because they are often the only ones strong enough to hold darkness without becoming it. That's why the world leans on them. That's why chaos finds them. Not to crush them, but to carve them. It's brutal, it's sacred, and it's invisible to those who've never carried it. But if you've lived it, you know. And here's where it gets deeper. Suffering isn't random. It's targeted. It chooses people who are capable of alchemizing it into something more, not just survival, but insight, compassion, even wisdom. The world has always evolved through people who turned wounds into truth, pain into empathy, trials into teachings. Every great spiritual leader, philosopher, artist, they didn't emerge despite suffering. They emerged through it, and this is where we're asked to shift our perspective. What if the fact that bad things happen to you isn't proof that you're cursed, but proof that you're chosen? Not chosen in a grandiose way, chosen in a quiet, sacred way to carry what others can't, to break cycles, to absorb pain and not return it, to suffer consciously. And that last part matters, because suffering that's unconscious becomes poison. It turns us bitter, withdrawn, or self-destructive. But suffering that's met with awareness, suffering that we sit with, ask questions of, allow to teach us, that kind of suffering becomes transformative. It makes us not just more human, but more real. And here's a thought that may be hard to accept. Maybe the point of life isn't to avoid suffering, but to engage with it so deeply that we become vessels of something greater. What if your heartbreak wasn't an error, but a door? What if your loss wasn't a punishment, but a calling? What if every pain you've carried was not just happening to you, but through you, for the world? These aren't metaphors. They're blueprints. Every time you've held yourself together in darkness, you've made the light more real. Every time you chose love when it would have been easier to shut down, you shifted the future in a direction no algorithm could predict. The good people of the world, the ones who keep loving, keep showing up, keep believing even when everything's broken, they are the soul of this world. And yes, they suffer, often more than anyone else. But they don't suffer in vain. They suffer into meaning. And maybe that's the real mystery. Not that bad things happen to good people, but that those bad things become the very soil from which their goodness grows even deeper roots. And maybe that's the secret no one tells us, that suffering doesn't destroy the good. It reveals it. It strips away illusions and demands authenticity. It calls forth the real you, the one that existed before the world told you who to be. And if you've been through pain and you're still here, still kind, still open, then you are walking proof of this deeper truth. So now I ask you, as deeply as I can, what have you been through that tried to shatter you but instead revealed something more real, more fierce, more tender in you? What did your suffering teach you about yourself that success never could? These are not casual questions. Sit with them. They might contain your entire purpose. Because once you see your pain not as punishment, but as initiation, everything changes. You're no longer a victim of life. You become a participant in the sacred. And that changes the game. If you're still here, still listening, I already know something about you. I know you've suffered. I know life hasn't gone easy on you. But here's the more important thing. You're still seeking, still asking questions, still willing to think, feel, and face the world instead of escaping it. That makes you rare, and it makes you powerful. Because the moment you begin to reframe suffering not as a flaw in the system, but as a signal of depth, is the moment you start to reclaim your life from meaninglessness. The universe doesn't gamble randomly. It places its highest bets on the people who have the most potential to turn suffering into light, into art, into truth, into service, into strength. And here's where it gets strange and beautiful. It's not that your pain was predestined. It's that your response to it reveals who you really are. Let's pause and reflect. What if the greatest mystery is not why bad things happen to good people, but why some people emerge from darkness kinder, wiser, and more alive, while others emerge colder, harder, and more cruel? This is where philosophy collides with responsibility. That you didn't choose your suffering, but you do choose what you build from it. And in that choice lies your power and your burden. Viktor Frankl, a man who survived the Holocaust, once said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." That's not just a coping strategy. That's spiritual judo. That's transmutation. That's how good people transform their pain into presence, their wounds into wisdom. We often say, "I didn't deserve this." And you're right, you didn't. But maybe the deeper question isn't what did I do to deserve this? But what does this pain want from me now? What new depth is it calling me into? What illusion is it trying to break? Sometimes, pain rips away the comforts that kept us numb. It breaks the mask. It burns down the house we built from borrowed beliefs so that we can finally live our own truth. Pain is a revealer. And in that light, what seems like cruelty often becomes clarity. But let me take it further. What if the real reason good people suffer is that their hearts are already open, already wired to feel more deeply, They're already attuned to beauty and truth and meaning, so when chaos hits, they experience the full depth of it. In that sense, pain doesn't fall randomly, but it flows to the open channels. And good people, because they've chosen love over numbness, presence over denial, are those channels. They feel the suffering that others deflect. They absorb the weight that others cast off. And that's why their suffering feels more intense, more unbearable, because they're not armored. But that openness is also what makes them holy, not in a religious sense, in a human sense. Their brokenness is what lets light through, and that's what makes them worth listening to. So here's a hard truth. When you choose to live awake, when you commit to integrity, compassion, and presence, you're stepping into a kind of sacred exposure. You're saying, I'm willing to feel. I'm willing to care. I'm willing to not look away from the brokenness of this world. That's not weakness. That's radical courage. That's the opposite of numbness. That's what philosophers from Buddha to Nietzsche to Simone Weil were pointing at. That to live well is not to live easily, but to live deeply. And to live deeply is to suffer with awareness. But there's one more layer, and this is where it gets metaphysical, even spiritual. What if your suffering wasn't just about you? What if it's part of a wider web of evolution? Not just genetic evolution, but moral evolution. What if the pain you carry, the loss, the injustice, the grief is part of a vast, invisible network of human awakening? And every time you transmute that pain through love, through expression, through stillness, through creation, you shift something collectively. Maybe not in a way science can yet measure, but in a way that changes the moral shape of the world. Look at history. Every moral revolution, abolition, civil rights, liberation began with someone who was suffering and refused to let that suffering turn into hatred. That is the real power of good people, not that they don't suffer, but that they don't spread it. They interrupt it. They stand as walls between trauma and the next innocent. And that is the quiet heroism most of the world never sees, and maybe never thanks. But the universe does, in ways we may never fully understand. So, what do we do with this truth? First, we stop asking, why me? And start asking, what now? That question reclaims agency. It reminds you that even in pain, you are not powerless. Second, we treat our pain as a sacred teacher, not as an enemy to destroy, but a mentor we must listen to. What is it trying to awaken in you? What falsehood is it trying to burn away? And third, maybe most important, we stop pretending that healing is a solo mission. Because it's not. We heal in mirrors, in witnessing, in being seen and seeing others in their truth. That's why sharing your pain not as a victim story, but as a survivor's insight is a radical act of service. So I leave you with this. What if the world isn't fair because it's not finished? What if the fact that you suffer and still choose goodness is the very thing helping build a better world? Not just in theory, but in every small act of presence, kindness, and truth. What if the greatest gamble the universe ever made was trusting that your pain would not make you bitter but make you brilliant? That you would become not less, but more, through your breaking? If that's even possibly true, then your life is not a tragedy. It's a transformation. And your suffering, it's not meaningless. It's a message from life, to you, to all of us, about what it means to be fully, painfully, beautifully human. So now I ask you, one last time, who are you becoming because of your pain, not in spite of it?